For centuries, philosophers have been locked in this really bitter debate about human nature.
Right, like the classic argument over whether we're fundamentally good or basically evil.
Exactly. I mean, we see thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Mencius arguing that humans are inherently good, just, corrupted by society later on.
But then Thomas Hobbes comes in with Leviathan, right? Arguing that human life in its natural state is nasty, brutish, and short.
Yeah, that we are fundamentally selfish and wicked.
Yeah.
But what is truly fascinating is that within our own church culture, we often bypass this philosophical debate entirely. We just automatically default to the darkest possible view.
Oh, absolutely. The moment we think of human nature, our minds just skip straight to Genesis chapter 3.
Right. We think of the fall, the forbidden fruit, Adam's massive failure, and just this heavy universal label of sinner.
Which is exactly why today's deep reflection is so vital. We really need to unpack this bias.
We do. So welcome to another Deep Reflection. We are thrilled to have the Word community joining us today as the essential third voice in this conversation.
Yes, it is so good to be reflecting together.
Today, our mission is to reflect on the recent Sunday message delivered at Hong Kong Cheil Church. We are unpacking Trinity Sunday, human nature, and our divine calling.
And that message completely upended that gloomy paradigm we were just talking about.
It really did.
As we transition out of the special liturgical seasons, from Advent through Pentecost, and we step into Trinity Sunday, the whole perspective shifts. We are challenged to look at humanity not as some tragic disappointment, but as the absolute flower of creation.
The flower of creation. I love that phrase. It really anchors this whole concept.
It's powerful. But the core idea here is stepping away from the lens of Adam's rebellion and instead looking at human identity through the glorious, illuminating lens of the triune God.
But, to truly grasp how radical it is to call a human being the climax of the cosmos, we really have to understand what the rest of the ancient world believed about where we came from.
Right, the historical context is everything.
Because if we just read Genesis in a vacuum, we totally miss the cultural earthquake it caused back then.
Exactly. I mean, the ancient Near East was dominated by completely different narratives about the origins of life. Look at the mythology of ancient Babylon, which was the dominant cultural superpower of that era.
Oh, the contrast with Genesis is staggering.
It really is. Take the Enuma Elish, which was essentially the Babylonian epic of creation. In that text, the universe is birthed out of a chaotic, violent war between the gods.
Yeah, the champion god, Marduk, defeats a rival god named Kingu.
Right, and what does Marduk do next? He literally executes Kingu, takes his blood, mixes it with the dirt of the earth, and shapes the first human beings.
And he definitely doesn't do this out of love or a desire for a relationship, right?
Oh, not at all. The motivation behind this creation is incredibly utilitarian. It is purely economic.
Basically just manufacturing a cheap labor force.
Exactly. The text is very explicit that humans were created to be slaves for the gods. The divine beings were just tired of maintaining the cosmos, so they made humans out of rubble, blood, and mud to take over the grueling manual labor.
That is so bleak. There's no romance, no dignity, no divine breath of life.
Just a cosmic labor force. And we see that exact same theme echoed in another famous Mesopotamian myth, the Epic of Atrahasis.
Right, where there's an established hierarchy among the gods, and the lower-tier gods are forced to do the heavy lifting.
Yes, specifically digging those massive trenches for the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and eventually those lower gods essentially go on strike.
They literally burn their tools and rebel against the ruling gods, right?
Yep. So to solve this massive labor dispute, the upper gods slaughter the leader of the rebellion and once again use his flesh and blood mixed with clay to create humans.
So the human race is invented merely as a pressure release valve for the tired gods.
Exactly. We were designed to be the lowest possible caste in the universe, just expending our lives to keep the gods comfortable.
Man, think about the psychological impact of living with that worldview. It's the difference between believing we were created as cheap, disposable factory labor versus being appointed as royal ambassadors.
Oh, completely. In the ancient mind, human life was fundamentally cheap. If a flood wiped out a city, it was just the gods discarding broken tools.
But then the Genesis narrative enters the cultural bloodstream, and it shatters this oppressive utilitarian view. It declares that humans aren't an afterthought made of rebel blood, but the deliberate, magnificent climax of the entire creation week.
Destined to rule and represent the Creator.
Right, which leads to a profound philosophical pivot. If the Genesis account establishes that we aren't slaves, but rather the authorized representatives of God, It demands that we understand the nature of the God we're representing.
Which brings us to one of the most debated linguistic quirks in the ancient texts.
Yes, Genesis 1.26, where the text says, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness."
The famous plural pronoun.
Yeah, because the monotheistic foundation of the entire Hebrew Bible is that there is only one true God. Yet here, at the very pinnacle of creation, God speaks in the plural. Let us. I know there's been a massive amount of historical debate over that one tiny word.
The debates have raged for centuries. Some early interpreters thought God was speaking to a heavenly court of angels, like inviting them to witness the creation.
But the problem there is that angels are never described as co-creators, right?
Right. They are created beings themselves, so that doesn't fit. Jewish rabbinical tradition sometimes interpreted it as God speaking to wisdom, personifying wisdom as a companion.
And later linguistic scholars often just wave it away as a plural of majesty, don't they?
Yes, the idea that a monarch refers to themselves as we to project supreme authority.
Like Queen Victoria's famous, "We're not amused."
Precisely. But many scholars point out that the plural of majesty is a relatively modern linguistic development. It doesn't genuinely fit the grammatical context of ancient Hebrew.
So what's the better framework?
Well, when we read this text through the theological framework of Trinity Sunday, a much more coherent and beautiful reality emerges. That us reveals the presence of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit at the dawn of time.
Yeah, and the rest of the biblical text totally supports this collaborative creation. We see in Colossians chapter 1 and the opening of John's Gospel the definitive statement that all things were created through Jesus.
Right. He wasn't some later addition to the divine plan. He was the word that spoke reality into existence.
And right there in Genesis 1.2, before the light is even called forth, the Spirit of God is hovering over the waters of the deep.
And this is where the message at Hong Kong Cheil Church challenged us to move past a purely academic understanding of the Trinity.
Because throughout church history, the doctrine of the Trinity has often been treated as this complex mathematical riddle to be solved.
Or worse, a rigid ideological litmus test used to condemn people who couldn't articulate it perfectly. But the core reality of the Trinity is not a puzzle. The defining word for the Trinity is fellowship.
Fellowship.
Yes. God is, at his very essence, a continuous, dynamic, loving relationship.
I want to pause on that because the implications are really staggering. We are so used to thinking of the foundational reality of the universe in terms of physics, like a singularity of infinite density or just raw explosive power.
Or even in religious terms, we often think of the ultimate reality as supreme, isolated authority.
Wait, so the foundational reality of the universe isn't just supreme power or raw energy, it's a relationship or a divine fellowship.
Exactly. And if the universe is built on a foundation of perfect relationship, and we are explicitly created in the image of that specific God, it radically defines human purpose. We were engineered for fellowship.
Which perfectly explains why in Genesis 2, the only thing in the pristine, unfallen creation that God declares not good is human isolation.
It makes perfect sense. Existing in isolation is quite literally a contradiction of our design. We were built for fellowship with the Creator, certainly, but also with one another.
But obviously, we live in a fractured world. We don't naturally know how to maintain that perfect communion. So who is the best example of this?
To understand what that deeply connected humanity actually looks like in practice, we have to look at the one person who perfectly embodied it.
Jesus, the ultimate template. Which points us back to Colossians 1.15, where the Apostle Paul describes Jesus as the visible image of the invisible God.
Right. If the invisible God is a perfect fellowship, then Jesus is what that fellowship looks like walking around in the physical world. Theologians often refer to Jesus not just as divine, but as the truest human or the perfect human.
That can sound counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
We tend to think of his divinity as what makes him distinct from us.
But his life actually demonstrates what humanity was supposed to be before it was corroded by selfishness. Jesus perfectly embodied fellowship.
And his version of fellowship was radically inclusive. He didn't isolate himself. He didn't lock himself away in a monastery or a secluded commune to maintain his purity.
Not at all. He plunged directly into the messy reality of the human condition. He mingled with a societal elite, but he also ate with the impoverished and the socially ostracized.
Right. He engaged with the self-righteous religious leaders and the publicly condemned sinners alike. He went to weddings. He wept at funerals. He cooked fish on the beach for his friends.
It completely redefines what it means to be holy. We often equate holiness with separation, like pulling away from the contamination of the world.
But Jesus shows us that true holiness, True humanity in the image of God is about moving toward people. Therefore, to be truly human is not to be a fallen sinner hiding in the bushes like Adam, but to be someone who loves and connects.
Which brings us to a highly practical, deeply challenging question for the word community. If true humanity is fellowship, how do we actually live this out practically today?
Well, the message brought up a brilliant spatial reality regarding Hong Kong Cheil Church. It is located right in the throbbing center of a bustling, extensive, noisy city. Why plant a church in the middle of all that chaos? Wouldn't a peaceful mountain retreat be far more conducive to spiritual growth?
The desire for the mountain retreat is deeply relatable because, frankly, the hardest part of human existence is other people.
Let's be honest, people are hard. The friction of daily urban life is exhausting. The message pointed out a painful irony. We fight the most with the people we see every day, our spouses, our kids. Running to the mountains sounds pretty great to avoid conflict.
The psychological urge to flee from relational pain is completely valid. But this is where the theology of the Trinity collides with our daily reality. We have to look at the Great Commission in Matthew 28.
Jesus commands his followers to go and make disciples of all nations.
Exactly. The church is in the city because we are called to go out, meet people, and build communities. Running away isn't human. True humanity is staying in the messiness, not giving up on people, and striving for unity.
Just as Jesus loved and forgave even those who betrayed him, he stayed in the relational tension all the way to the cross.
And that reframes how we look at every single person we interact with. Every annoying coworker, every difficult family member bears the image of the triune God. There is no one we are allowed to casually discard or hate.
Wow. To briefly recap this incredible journey we've taken through the source material today, we are God's partners, born with a nature and mission to reflect the triune God through unrelenting, loving fellowship with the world. This is the highest calling of a human being.
It is a calling that requires immense grace, but it is the only path to experiencing the fullness of what we were created to be.
As we draw this deep reflection to a close, we want to leave the word community with a final thought, not just a concept to ponder, but a reality to live out. Word community, as you step back into the busy streets and your daily routines, consider this. If the core of the universe is a God of perfect fellowship and you are made in that exact image, who is the one person in your life right now that you have stopped trying to fellowship with?
We all have someone where the friction became too much.
What would it look like this week to refuse the urge to run to the quiet mountain and instead step toward them with the same relentless love that the triune God has shown you?
That is the beautiful, difficult work of being truly human.
We encourage the word community to hold this question in your hearts this week. May you experience the profound grace and peace of the triune God as you go out into the world.